here. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about Canada and some recent articles in the newspaper that have to do with immigrant language learning. A while ago, the Canadian government announced that all immigrants would have to reach level 4 on the Canadian language benchmarks, which is about a A2 on the European framework, sort of like an advanced beginner level in order to emigrate to Canada, and that even landed immigrants would have to reach that level in order to acquire citizenship. People over the age of 55 would be exempt. This, of course, created a great kerfuffle in the immigrant services industry. I wouldn't say leading, but a Chinese politician wrote in the newspaper that this was racist. I gather that leaders of the sort of Chinese ethnic organizations here were against this idea. It was considered unfair and so forth. So that was one event. Then there was an article in the Toronto Star reporting on a study that was done by an institute in Montreal, a very reputable institute, where they had traced immigrants whose native language was Mandarin and compared them to immigrants whose native language was either Russian or Ukrainian. And they found that the Mandarin speaking group made relatively little or made essentially no progress in their comprehension, pronunciation, and ability to use English over a period of 7 years. So they followed however many, 30 or 40 immigrants, and they found that essentially they made no progress. Whatever level in the language they arrived with, essentially that's what they had after 7 years, which is more or less what I've found with the people that I've met in the Chinese immigrant community. If they arrive speaking English, they maintain it. Although one lady said she spoke more English in Hong Kong than she does in Vancouver. But normally they maintain it, but they don't improve. Whereas the Russian, Ukrainian, Slavic language speaking immigrants improved. The Chinese group were less likely to have more than a 10-minute conversation with a Canadian. They were less knowledgeable about Canadian events and so forth. So, you take these two together, China is perhaps, or has been for the last 10 years, the largest source country of immigrants to Canada. So the first question is, should immigrants be required to learn English? Well, I think they should, because citizenship is really all about membership in a society. You can't be separate from the society because you're involved, you pay taxes, you're part of the medical system, the school system, you're part of that society. You live beside other people, you work with other people, you can't just be isolated in your own language community. I mean, you can, but from the point of view of the receiving community, the existing society here, that's probably not considered very desirable. If I listen to what Canadians have to say, like my teammates in the Old Timers hockey, one of them said he was at a citizenship swearing-in ceremony and there were people there who couldn't speak English, and he was appalled that we would give citizenship to someone who can't speak English. And so surely the existing members of society should have some say in who they want to accept as new citizens. And I am sure that a requirement to speak one of the two national languages would be quite high. So I think that's a legitimate request. Unfortunately, the level the government has asked for is extremely low. You will not be able to work with a beginner level in English. But I guess it's better than nothing. But even at that, there's this great resistance to it. Then at the other end of the spectrum, you have this study of a group of, I think, 30 or so, and I'll post the link, Mandarin speakers who essentially made no progress. We spend a fortune here on language instruction for immigrants, and immigrants may spend some money of their own. They certainly spend their time, the time they spend in class, and the Mandarin speaking group doesn't improve. Why is that? Well, obviously the Mandarin speakers have certain disadvantages when learning English. They don't have as much common vocabulary. The Slavic language speakers have all those Latin and Greek origin words. The language systems are more similar. However, as someone who has learned Asian languages, I don't consider that to be an insurmountable problem. Rather, the biggest issue is that the Slavic speakers are more motivated to find out about the new society that they have moved to. Even though they maintain contact with in many cases, with the Russian-speaking or Ukrainian-speaking or I don't know what, they just said Slavic maybe, or Croatian-speaking community, but they integrate more, they're more motivated to connect with and make friends with other members of this new society that they moved into. Whereas the motivation for this amongst Mandarin speakers is not very strong, and that's been my observation. You do meet exceptions. I met people who came here and went to work selling door to door when they had a very strong accent, and lo and behold, within a few years they were speaking flawless English. So there's no reason why a Chinese person, if so motivated, would also not be able to improve their English. But it's absolutely astounding. This is a very serious study. After 7 years, there's no significant progress in their level of English. That can only mean to me that they're not motivated to improve. I am thoroughly convinced that anyone who is motivated to improve, who takes responsibility for their own learning, will improve. But there again, I think the Mandarin speaking group is more inclined to believe that a teacher has to teach them, they have to go to school, and that there's nothing they can do on their own, and they don't sort of relate the fact that they watch nothing but Mandarin speaking television programs in the evening to the fact that they can't speak English very well. So I was thinking to myself, maybe the government should say, if the immigrant achieves level 4 on the Canadian language benchmark system, I might add that I think of all the different systems for giving people levels in a language, the Canadian language benchmark system is undoubtedly the worst, overly complicated. You can't understand what it's trying to say half the time. Fine shades of, level 3 you can ask for the bathroom, but you can't order a beer. Level 4 you can ask for the bathroom, but you can't do something else. I mean, it's extremely complex and I think quite silly, but that's the system we have here. But if they said, okay, if you achieve level 4, you get citizenship. If you achieve level 8, you get $10,000. I think a lot of people would learn. In other words, it's all about motivation. You have to figure out how to motivate people. The Chinese group have such a large group of people who speak the same language here, they don't feel tremendously motivated. They quickly sort of slot themselves into a low-paid job working for Chinese people. I might add that any Chinese employer is extremely unlikely to hire anybody but another Chinese person, whereas in the mainstream economy, in fact, you do see a lot of people, including Chinese people, who work within the mainstream economy. So there's this tremendous desire to kind of stay amongst themselves, which inhibits language learning. Now, it gets back to this subject too. Just to finish off with this whole business of university education, I did a video about the students striking in Quebec, and I think they're, of course, quite silly. They're saying, education should be free, when, of course, the issue is not education at all. The issue is the ticket. They want their diploma to be free, because most of those students are studying the humanities, might be studying language for that matter, and just as with the example of the immigrants and their language learning, if you said, okay, here is an institution or a number of institutes that will issue diplomas and they will test for a month, it doesn't matter, they test your ability to write, to express yourself, to understand, to whatever, in history, sociology, whatever it might be, and once a year you have to go and get tested, but where you study is up to you. If students had to pay the equivalent of $20,000 a year, which is what it costs to go to one of our universities as they are now established, the student pays $3,300 in Quebec, $5,000 in most provinces. The students in Quebec are being asked to pay a little more, but it's still 15 to 20% of the true cost. But if anyone had to pay the true cost of a university education in order to get that education, or could go and study on their own wherever they wanted, but they could get the diploma by going to the diploma granting institution. So they needn't spend their time and money at a university. They can do it online. They can do it in libraries. They can organize themselves however they want. I think that the number of people going to university would decline tremendously, even though people like to say, you know, it's very important, it's very stimulating, stuff like that. Yeah, but not for $20,000 a year. So here again, just as with the language learning, if you say, okay, what you want is a diploma, which you think is going to help you get a better job, fine. Even if the government paid for the testing. But where you go to get the education is entirely up to you. You would find that a lot of people would get themselves educated pretty quickly, just as well, and would get their diplomas. Similarly with language learning, if you told those immigrants from China that, you know, if they achieve whatever level in English, they make $20,000, which, you know, I don't know what it costs us to educate those immigrants, but I read somewhere it's like $2,000 or $3,000 a year, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of immigrants. We spend, I'm sure we have spent billions of dollars. So it's far better, far more economical to say to the immigrants, if you achieve level X, you get $20,000. Okay, now you go and educate yourself wherever you want. If you want to go to school with that, that's fine. But at the end result is $20,000. So you pay for the result. You don't pay for people to attend school, such has been the case with these Mandarin speaking immigrants who have been studying English and paid for by the government and who make no progress. You pay for the result. If you achieve the result, you get this money. So it's your risk. If you don't think you're going to get there, you won't spend the money, fine. But then the results won't be very different from what they are now, because right now, according to this study, they don't improve anyway. So, well, I kind of meandered around a few topics, and I'm sure I'll get a fair amount of negative comment as usual, but I look forward to your opinions. Thank you for listening.